sounds like it's something that, just happens to you. Oh, my family's just under generational curse. Well, no, somebody in the family sinned, and sinned often, and sinned long enough that it affected everybody else in the family, right? I mean, we can go ahead and establish that right off the bat. Alcoholism is a disease, but at some point, even before the addiction part, it's a choice, right? All of our addictions start out as choices and become addictions the longer we give into them. Not just things like alcohol, but things like cigarettes, but not even physical things. But I mean, there's certain emotions people get into, right? Certain negative thinking patterns, certain just all kinds of things. So we're going to start in Exodus 34. If you want to flip back there. The first question, how can a parent's sin affect their children? Before we answer that, let's read the text. And the text says, who wants to read it? You got it, Claire?
6 to 9.
6 to 9.
Okay. To 9, it says 7.
6 to 7. Yeah.
Huh?
Rob. 6 to 7. Yeah, just 6 to 7.
And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate, gracious God, slow to anger, abundantly in love, faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punished the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and the fourth generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. Lord, he said, if I have found favor in your eye, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin and take us at your inheritance.
I do like how Moses describes his own people as stiff-necked. Sounds like a lot of people praying for their family. Lord, bless this miserable lot. Forgive them, they don't know how bad they are, God.
I've heard that before, I've heard that too.
So I think the first answer, somebody just give me an example, how can a parent's sin affect their children? I think we've heard lots and lots of stories about things like this. So someone just give me an example of how sin affects their kids. Go ahead.
In addiction, and I talk a lot about that.
Right.
But I've seen women that have had children with terrible birth defects, all caused from drugs.
Right. My mom took on foster kids and they were addicted to cocaine out of the womb.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So nothing the kid did, no choice they made, but they came out of the womb and they're already addicted to a drug. They're already struggling with their health. Let me give something a little more lighthearted. Anybody ever watch America's Funniest Home Videos?
Yeah.
You know what drives a certain person in our family who shall remain nameless absolutely crazy? Is when the kid's just doing something deplorable, just horrible. They're like, coloring the walls with markers or whatever. The parents laughing, taking the picture out. Like, why don't you parent? Right? Because their lack of parenting is going to come back to haunt that kid, isn't it? Right? The fact that they didn't say, hey, stop it, cut it out, right? That kid's going to be in some teacher's class coloring on her walls, and the kid's going to be laughing while the teacher's saying no. Right? The kid is still responsible for their own actions when they get to a certain age, but there's a lot of things that they're carrying just because. And I always say that kids are given to us in the moments when we are the least qualified to raise them. Right? But the problem is by the time we're just wise enough to raise them, we don't have the energy. Right? That's how we get all the smarts in there. That's why you find people who are kids of parents who had kids late in life, they kind of let them get away with a lot. That's just, you're just like, oh my gosh. I mean, by the time Tristan was, 8 or 9, I was just tired of chasing. I'm just like, oh my gosh, just don't. Okay, just don't. Right? In fact, when he was real little, I used to count to 3. When I hit 3 was on, right? But with the other 2, I'd start counting, and they'd straighten up. With Tristan, I'd say 1, 2, and he'd watch to see if I was getting up. like if I'm sitting on the couch and I'm counting, he's like, But if
one of the things in our society today that I think is affected that is there's a lot of 20-year-olds that have never been to church because their parents never took them.
Right, and again, they're not getting the exposure, and the common saying is, I don't want to choose my kid's religion, right?
Yes.
But you choose your kid's diet, you choose your kid's clothes, you choose your kid's physical health, because whether or not you let them outside or you keep them inside, you make all these other choices for the kid, but the religion one, no, not going to make that one for them, right? Because obviously spiritual health is not important to my child. Can anybody tell me about things that their parents did that they didn't realize affected them until they got older? I mean, you ever heard your mom's word come out, your mom's or your dad's words come out of your mouth, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember the first time I was like, I can't have nothing nice with you kids in this house. I know where that came from. That was my dad, right? In his defense, I broke a lot of things. We were two boys who wrestled and, Anybody else? Somebody else give me a story. I know you guys have heard your own mom's voice, your own mom or your own dad come out of your mouth at some point, right? Never, Paul?
Can't think of one.
I will say this, all of us learned one of two things from our parents, right? How to act or how not to act, right? Some of us saw things that our parents went through. In fact, my little brother's testimony is partially that he saw the things I did and knew what not to do. Part of his, he's like, I grew up watching you get into all this trouble, and I said, well, don't do that. And I was like, that was a good plan. Of course, my brother grew up when there were videotapes, and he videotaped some of his shenanigans. I never left evidence. So, someone get 2 Samuel 12:10. Does anybody else have a story about how their parents maybe affected their lives and you didn't realize it was affecting your life? Because I think a lot of times when you're older is when you start to figure it out, right? Because when you're 20-something, you're like completely not like your parents, right? You've gone, but then eventually you kind of, let's say we're all kind of bent a certain way, right? And sometimes we get away from that, and sometimes our resting place, if we're not careful with our life, goes back into some of those habits, right? I heard a guy say once that he went to a golf coach to get his golf swing down, and while he was with that golf coach, he got his swing down perfect. He got a good handicap. I mean, his numbers were up, but then he went 3 years without playing golf because of his situation, and guess where his golf swing went? Right back to being the bad golf swing before he got coached, right? Sometimes if we don't take time to relearn some things, we can go back into our old habits. So you got 2 Samuel, Mona?
Verse 10?
Yeah.
Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thy house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife.
Anybody know the story we're talking about here? David took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be his wife, right? Wasn't supposed to do that. Not supposed to take another man's woman. Shouldn't have to be said, right? Shouldn't have had to say that. Yet God had to send a prophet to David because David was okay with it. So the prophet stands in his way. David, no, right? And so he says the sword's never going to depart your house. And what do we know about the descendants of David and Judah, right? They're fighting for their survival all their days until finally the Babylonians come and wipe out Jerusalem, right? So his grandkids end up, right? Doesn't seem fair, does it? Does anybody else, and this is, see, I have this thing. I know I told you I wouldn't do this, right? I have this. If you guys have ever seen this in my office. This is a book that my brother made one year for Christmas. He made us all one of these. And in here are all sorts of facsimile copies and letters and stories and everything we know about our family from when they landed in Virginia in the 1700s, down through Arkansas, out west, all the tales we have of our family he kind of bound together in a volume.
How much spaghetti did you eat?
Probably none. They were poor Irishmen and Indians.
No. My kind of people.
But what's interesting is how if you go back into some of your history sometimes, you see the same personalities or the same types of things taking place. Because we're talking negative here, right? That, okay, because our parents did something bad, we did something bad. But the opposite is true too. When your parents display good qualities and you pick up on those good qualities, they become part of your life even though you did nothing to earn them. Now the story of my family goes like this. My great-great-grandfather was a slave-owning plantation owner who was on the wrong side of the Civil War and lost everything, right? Poor and destitute, he took off out west with a Bible and a gun and became a Methodist circuit riding minister. So he was the first preacher in our family. But then ever since him, every oldest male has been a preacher. Right? My grandfather was a pioneer preacher. He'd go out to a town where there was no church. He'd plant a church. He'd get going about 50 or 60 people, and then he'd appoint a pastor, and then he'd move on to another town. Did this all out west. There's even a letter here from his father to him about how they were going to preach from one part of California to another and had to stop and pick tomatoes, to make enough money to get to the next town, right? To support themselves, to go to the next town and preach. And then, of course, my dad was a pastor, and my dad did a lot of preaching and all this when I was a kid. And so I have this benefit, because my family didn't have any money to leave me, right? But I have this benefit, unearned, that I know there's a certain anointing on my life because for 4 generations, right, they've been faithful to the call of God. And there were times when I was running from the call of God and understood that my ability to run was limited. I was a prodigal, and I wanted to do wrong things, but I knew God would only let me do so much wrong, if that makes sense, right? That even at my most unhinged, I was still on a leash, right? Because I had a praying dad, and I had generations of preachers whose legacy still lived on inside of me, right? Nothing I earned, but that's just how the table was set for me, right? So there's not just bad that comes out of this, but there's also good that comes out of this. Because the good things, did you know, like for instance, if your parents do music, then you're more likely to be musically inclined, right? My mom can play piano by ear. You can play a song on a radio, and my mom can just pick up the piano and start playing that song. She didn't learn notes until I was, like 16 or 17. That's when she learned how to actually read notes on the piano. But she played piano all her life, right? Just one of those things. She could pick it up and do it. I think some of my musical, leanings or whatever go back to her side of the family. Again, not something earned. Can you guys think of anything in your life that kind of the table was set for you, good or bad? And that's what I'm saying, is it's not just bad. It's not just, hey, my parents messed up, so I'm like this. Because we do that, right? I had this little thought that's going to come out Sunday about what blame does to us, right? When we come to the point where I go ahead and say, I'm going to blame this on whoever, right? I'm going to blame this on my mom. It's my mom's fault this, or it's my dad. It's my dad's fault this. Once you take that stand, you're giving up your ability to do anything about it. It's my mom's fault I'm so emotional, right? Now it's okay for me to be emotional. It's my mom's fault, not my own. I'm not responsible for what comes out of my mouth. My mom did this, so I can do this too. Right? My dad was cold and distant. I don't have to interact with my kids because my dad was a cold and distant dad, and now that I have somebody to blame this for, I don't have to be responsible for my own actions. Right? So blaming is not what I'm trying to get to. But we all have the table kind of set for us from birth, right? How many of you know Donald Trump's kids were probably going to be financially successful? Right? They'd have had to be spectacularly bad at things to not have gotten money, right? Just because that's how the table is set. Not good or bad. It's just what they were born into. Just like for me, I would probably have to be spectacularly bad as a minister to not end up in the ministry somewhere because I had people praying for me along this line, right? And God had already set aside a gift for me to be what He was going to call me to be. So I would have to really, really mess this thing up not to be where He wanted me to be. Now, what about you guys? Somebody tell me something. How did your parents set the table for you, or your grandparents? Go ahead. Alcoholic. So they kind of set it back. They put a hurdle out there, right? I guess they can either put a hurdle or a slide. Slide gets you going faster. Hurdle blocks your way, right? They kind of put a concrete barrier with a big warning sign on it right there for you. You missed that sign.
But my daughter took it the other way.
But your daughter took it the other way. You're right. Your daughter's never been involved in any of that.
No.
So even though, you had your own stumble with it, there was something there, right? That was broken in her.
She's seen something she didn't like.
There you go. Good. Anyone else?
Well, I don't know how you figure this out, but my birth parents, I said as I was growing up, I'm not going to be like them. I'm going to raise my own kids. I'm not going to go into this system thing. And I felt I accomplished that.
right? And it put a real fire in your belly to not let that happen,
Correct.
right? That no matter how bad things got, this I'm going to hold on to. So they did, in a way, set your goal, right? Not intentionally, right? And I think there's a lot to that, because I think each of us gets a choice in this. We choose what we take from our parents and what we leave behind, right? There was this moment I had with my mom that I'll always remember this, because we were out back of a medical place where she was working at, and you know, I'm like in a trench coat and tie and all this stuff, you know, I'm dressed, but I'd stop over and have lunch with her. I think she just liked her, you know, business son coming and having lunch and, you know, showing me, walking me around the thing, right? But we had this moment where we were standing out back and we started talking, and she was trying to express something she couldn't, and all of a sudden I realized I understood her probably better than anybody else, because I'm probably more like her than anybody else. And all of a sudden, I could express to her what it was that she was feeling and going through, and why she was bothered by it. And when she understood I could do that, all of a sudden, you know, something clicked in her too, right? That here I was as the adult son, being able to come back and say, well, you know what? I have these same sort of leanings. I kind of fall into the same trap, or I kind of do the same things, or think along the same way. And all of a sudden, there was a freedom for her in that too, right? Because then, you know, when your kid understands, you know, that's, you know, that's why we made you. Right? That's why we had kids. I kid, Gareth was literally the mini me growing up. Now he's taller, so like, he can't really be the mini. But so someone else, tell me Robin, how'd your parents set the table for you?
They were very childish and very young, so it was very chaotic. And for many years, probably 25 years of adulthood, my life was always chaos.
Wow. And you're a very structured person now, though, aren't you? Because that structure brings you comfort. Because in those times you were looking for comfort, for some sort of structure. And kids love structure.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we don't get about kids, is sometimes we think you got to let them run free like little wild heathens in order for them to grow right. But kids like to know where the boundaries are. They like to know, you know, what right and wrong is. They're looking for someone who says, I've been through this, I know what's right and I know what's wrong, and here's your boundaries. They're looking for that from the parents.
They want a line, they know you can cross.
Huh?
They want a line, they know you can cross.
Yeah, they want to leave.
I was thinking of several different things. One, I didn't realize this at the time. But
Now, your mom is sitting right by you.
No, this first thing I talk about is my dad. But with my dad, and I didn't realize this at the time until I got older, but his parents got divorced, so his dad was in another state, so they weren't that close.
Right.
That made him want to be there for me and my brother, and do stuff with us, and spend time with us, you know, and do things like Indian guides and Cub Scouts and stuff,
Yeah.
because he wanted to be involved in his children's life, because his dad wasn't. I didn't realize that at the time, you know, when I was a little boy.
Right.
But I think that's one of the reasons why, because his dad wasn't there. He was going to be there for us.
Right.
You know.
Is anybody not okay with me calling on them? All right, Mary. I gave you a chance to raise your hand, you didn't take it. Because see, I know you've got great stories here. I know you've got great testimonies of some of the stuff, right? So that's why I said that. I knew if nobody raised their hand, then you're all on the hook, and I could just call on whoever. Notice I didn't give you that much time to think about it too, right? And 3, 2, 1. How'd your parents set the table for you?
Very badly.
Very bad.
Very, very badly. My mom walked when I was 6. Before that, there was a lot of fighting. My mother was very violent, not only with my dad, but with us kids. My mom did a lot of chasing around.
Yeah.
My dad was an alcoholic.
So your dad set a roadblock, and your mom put a pit on the other side of that roadblock and filled it with alligators, right? So you had a lot to get through there, didn't you?
Yeah.
How did it? You went through a rebellious time, right?
My whole life.
Yeah, your whole life. Still about.
I still am.
I was gonna say checking your watch till about 5. Yeah,
I might
5:15.
get over it in 10 or 20 more years.
You're working it out. That's good. That's good. Get it out. Get it out.
Thank you.
How many of you know something about your grandparents and know enough to know, like, say for instance, which grandparent you favor? Does anybody know what grandparent they favor? Yeah. How do you favor them?
I just enjoy being with them more than the other.
Well, when I say favor, okay. Here's my family tree. And listen, if I get into all my family history, because I'm a big history guy, right? Which means I have to know my own family history. And there's some branches that get a little twisted, if you know what I mean. But I know that on both sides of my family were preachers. There was my dad's side where all this great stuff that I just talked about came from. And then there was my mom's side. Now, my mom's dad was a preacher, but he was a con man. Not only was he a con man, but he was a child abuser and he was a sexual molester. Right? So, at all this time, he's putting up the pretense of this, and my mom's growing up in this house that's always full of abuse. I won't even tell you the stories. The one I always tell people, just to give them context, is that when my Uncle Preston, the uncle that I favor, tried to run away from this, he was caught and tied to a tree, and my grandfather beat him until they had to peel the shorts off him. Right? So this is what my mom comes out of, right? And I always look at my life because I know that I have preachers on both sides. And I can see from both of their examples, because one was honest but poor, never had enough money to do anything because he was always out there giving his life to the ministry, you know. And then I had the other one who was always just trying to get something over on people and always being deceptive about people, right? And then I see what happened to my mom coming through that, and I see what happened to my dad. And it all came down to how they spanked me, right? Because when my dad would spank me, he would come into the room and say, son, you know what you did, you know it was wrong, and I'm going to spank you because you did it. And he would spank me, and I think he counted it in his head. I don't know. Right? Back in those days, you could get hit with a belt, nobody called anybody. Right? If somebody's kids were screaming down the court, you just shut your window. Right? Now, my mom, on the other hand, would come into the room with the belt, and she was a little emotionally charged, right? She's swinging this thing and yelling at me and asking me questions while she's spanking me, like, are you ever going to do that again? No, yes, you are. Why are you lying to me? Right? And you'd be like, I'm not lying. Yes, you are. You're still lying. Just, right? And so I saw immediately from that, when my kids came out, how I was going to treat them, right? That I was never going to discipline them if they didn't know what they were being disciplined for. I was never going to punish them without explaining and saying, hey, this is why. And sometimes your teenagers will ask you all kinds of questions, and it's inside of you to just strangle them. Right? But you don't, because you know that I know that I had a dad who would sit down with me, and after the discipline was over, he always came back in the room in a couple of minutes, and he says, you know, you're my son, and I still love you. And I just did this because of what you did, but I still love you because you're my son. Right? And had this little conversation, this little talk-down conversation, and I knew punishment was over. The punishment was separate from how he felt about me. It was because of what I had done. Right? And once the punishment was over, it was over. And so I wanted to be that way with my kids. I remember one time I spanked, I think it was Hunter, and then afterwards, 5 minutes later, I'm playing cards with him, and Kristen's like, you just spanked him, why are you playing? I was like, no, I have to play cards with him now, so he knows I didn't spank him because I was mad, right? It was because of what he did, but I'm still his dad, and I still love him, and we're still going to spend time together, right? So I had that kind of table. Now, when it goes back to my grandfathers, I think about how each one has set that table, right? That's why I'm always really careful with I love emotion, right? I'm a passionate person, but I've also seen what happens when it's out of control, right? My dad had a lot of control in his emotions, but sometimes he was the opposite, where he couldn't show any emotion, right? Like, house is on fire, and he's just, well, actually, no. The one time I set the house on fire, he was completely out of control. Long story. I only set it on fire once. Get that. I didn't mean it was a little science experiment when I think of it. So, what is a family pattern? Here's a family pattern for you. This is actually kind of a poverty mindset thing. If somebody sees a sign that says half off, one person says, wow, I only have to spend half as much money, and another person says, I'll buy two. Right? And the person who's always saying, I'll buy two, usually ends up having less money than the person who says, wow, I only have to pay half the cost. Right? And yet one will wonder, how come I'm having to live paycheck to paycheck and stretch this, and the other one has savings and it doesn't seem fair, and yet there's already a thought process, and some of that comes out of family patterns, right? I heard growing up, every time I was in Kmart, we don't have any money. In my mind, it meant that we literally had $0. When I found out later on in life, there was actual money in the bank for something, just not the thing I wanted, right? I was incensed. What do you mean, right? I was one of those kids, we didn't know how poor we were until we went to school, right? You went to school and kids were like, yeah, I've got like 6 pair of blue jeans. 6? Whoa, Rockefeller. 6 pair of blue jeans, right? It's crazy. Can you guys help me out here? Name some things that kind of in your family, it was just, that's kind of how it was done, right? And you grew up thinking, well, that's just how money is handled. That's just how conflict is handled. That's just how, like, how many of you had parents that argued loudly in front of you? Anyone? Yeah, come on. You know, if you were a kid and didn't hear your parents argue, that just meant they were really good at going somewhere else, right? That's or they just.
No, I grew up in a household where there was no emotion showed of any kind.
Were they Lutherans?
I'm probably the only one in this room. I was never spanked, but then I was never hugged.
Yeah.
There was no emotion, nothing.
So that was your family pattern. Now, I have known you to hug people. Which makes me think that somewhere along the line...
I'm getting my hugs in
Yeah,
now.
right, exactly. Now you decided, hey, I don't like the way this pattern is. I don't like... And the funny thing is when you get older, you can actually kind of look at your parents and figure out why they were that way. You know what I'm saying? You can kind of look at their parents, you can kind of start looking down the line, and you can start to see how someone's decision can follow the family for 3 and 4 generations. You know, I'll bet, so your dad was an alcoholic, right? Do you know anything about your grandfather?
Never met him.
Right? So I'll bet you that started back there too, right? Then at least the pattern of irresponsibility, the pattern of not being around, right? That sort of thing.
So yeah, like in my family, my brother was an alcoholic, and it's a fact that both of his children have had difficulty with alcohol, probably as a result of that.
And it's always amazing how far back you can go in the family tree and kind of see where these things kind of follow people around, right?
Yeah, my mother was divorced, and my brother and I were from the first marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and then we were turned over to our grandparents to take care of us while she remarried another man. And I took care of my grandparents because they took care of me during the problems, so I took care of them, and to their natural party.
Right, and you have a strong sense of duty, and that probably comes from the fact that you want to take care of people because when you needed someone, no one was there to take care of you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Good job.
Oh, here.
Go ahead.
I grew up during the Depression,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that affected my whole life. Even I carried that through in my marriage, the worry about having food for the men to eat, what I had to cook for.
You know, and the funny thing is I think a lot of us kind of have a hoarding mentality sometimes because we're afraid of not having. Like when we're talking about food pantry and stuff like that, something Kristen always says is the people that are going to support the food pantry the most are people that have been hungry and not had money, right? People that know what it's like to be hungry and not have anything to get you by. You support something like that because you're like, oh man, I've been there, right? And there's that immediate, I want to be able to make sure that people don't go through that kind of reaction to it, almost an emotional type thing. So somebody tell me, what was the best thing you learned from your parents? Let's do the good now. What was the best thing you learned, Christy?
Humor.
Humor?
Bad things happen. Humor never goes away.
There you go.
If you can't laugh, it's better to laugh than to cry.
That's good. That's good.
My grandparents were very intelligent. My grandfather was very intelligent. He was a newspaper man of the highest quality.
So what was the best thing you learned from him?
That he took care of us, so I took care of him, and he was very good at it.
Yeah.
It's a shame that he had to retire, but if you get to a certain he could proofread and correct. He'd even call up the customer for the ad to suggest other things that would appeal to the readers. But he knew he had that much knowledge of what goes and what doesn't.
That's awesome.
He had that much knowledge.
Paul, give me something good you got from your dad.
That much knowledge.
There's got to be a good, every pile of coal's got a diamond in there somewhere, right?
He wasn't good to me. He wasn't good to me, so I can't think of anything. Well, in his last days, in the last couple of weeks before he passed, he finally had a talk with me. He told me the reason he treated me poorly because he wanted to make me strong. That's it.
I forgot
This actually points to something that happens a lot of times with families, is that we're not given a manual, right? When you guys had little Matt, there was no book saying, okay, it's exactly what you got to do with little Matt, right? Yeah, at 0 to 6 months, do this. 6 to 12 months, do that. 3, right? There's no, right? And especially what's sad nowadays is how much of our kids are being raised on media, right?
Yes.
And how much television, movies, and pop culture will actually influence how we treat and raise our kids. On the other hand, growing up, people say they grew up older than me, there was no information out there, right? There was no one to learn how to parent from except your parents. And you know, back when we were in more what you'd call a sustenance mindset, meaning you're not working to, you know, buy a better house, you're working to put food on the table, right? I mean, we're a blessed nation now. We just are. And even, of course, I can't say anything in this church. I mean, you guys would feed me if not. I mean, I'd be. If somebody said something, if something ever happened to Kristen, I'd say I'd go shortly after because I would die of obesity when the church was giving me food 24/7, and I would just eat myself to death within a couple weeks. Right? But there was a difference when the dad was going out or the mom was going out and it was a fight just to put food on the table, right? Just to get by, just to have enough to get to the next thing. There was no, you know, I should stop and see if my kids are developing well emotionally and if they're secure, right? There wasn't, right? Because life was so stressful, life was so much harder that they were trying that. Part of what we get to do now, because we live in this day and age, is we get to step back and not just say, okay, I can earn enough money to live, but we can look and say, but how can I make life better? Right? And so we can actually examine some of these things and actually say, well, you know what? Some of the stuff my parents did wasn't right. And I'm going to go and throw this at you. Some people have done that and they throw the Bible in to back up what they're doing, right? Some people took spare the rod and spoil a child and beat the snot out of your child. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, some people will take a Bible verse, they'll just have a phrase in it, and they'll just use that phrase and then tie that on there. And one of the good things now is that we do know more, right? And we have a chance to know more, and we can fix some of this kind of stuff, which is kind of why we're going through all this. So before we get to this, because that's what we're going to end on, let's go over here to what did your family teach you about? So these are all different areas that, whether you meant to or not, you learned something from your family in these areas. First one is money. Somebody tell me what your family taught you about money. Growing up in the Depression, I'm going to guess and say it wasn't there. It didn't exist, just in fairy tales, right?
At 5 years old, I remember going on vacation, seeing my mother crying, and I didn't realize what she was crying about was what she was going to put on the supper table.
Yeah.
They're
We lived on a farm.
Yeah. I heard, go ahead, John.
my father was so efficient in his ability to think that he could win every card game he ever played if he wanted to. But he could also, if he wanted to make somebody cheery to sell him an ad, he could make him win.
Did he teach
To
you
cheer
anything
him
about?
up to sell an ad?
Did he teach you anything about money?
Deliberately.
They don't grow on trees.
It don't grow on trees.
And sometimes you complain how hard it was to get him to win.
Kristen, what's your family teach you about money?
My mom or my dad. My dad was very careful with money. He was very careful with money. And we got a certain amount at the beginning of the year. We were responsible to buy all our toiletries, our clothes, all those things. There were no extras. Like, there wasn't, like, you got something for Christmas, but in between, like, beginning and, you know, there weren't any extras and there weren't opportunities for extras. They weren't stingy, but they were, like, my dad was really practical with money.
Did anyone's family teach them that money meant security?
Yes, definitely.
Right. That if you didn't have money, you were in an insecure position. If you had money, you were in a secure position. Right? Did anybody in their family teach them that making more money meant success?
Yeah.
I was in the Navy once, and I'll never forget this, because the guy was just, you know, the only smart thing ever came out of his mouth. When I said something about, well, that person makes a lot of money, and they looked at me and goes, well, that makes him a better person than you, doesn't it? And I was like, no, I guess it doesn't. Right? It was funny because the smartest thing that guy, and the only smart thing that a guy ever said to me, because most of the other time I thought he was kind of like, you know. But he said, it didn't make him a better person, right? Go ahead, Christy.
One of the smartest things that my father explained, I said, their dad has a really nice car, they must be rich. He goes, no, that means that they can take out a line of credit, they still have to pay it back. Just because you have really nice things, it doesn't say a lot about you. What is your character?
Exactly. Now, what does the Bible say about money?
It's the root of all evil.
The root of all sorts of evil, right?
What about horse radish?
The Bible does not speak well of money, right? We use the verse, I want you to prosper as your soul prospers, because I don't think God wants all of his children to be starving and poor, okay? I don't think God's will for your life is that you should scrape by and hope there's something to eat. But at the same point, right, the Bible does not speak well of money because most of the time money is more of a trap than it is, right? Like a certain amount of money, and there's something that they've actually done studies and discovered that when you make over a certain amount of money, you actually get no return on your quality of life. Like you get up to a certain level, and I forget what the number was, it's not big, but once you get over a certain level, having any more than that money does not really bring anything extra into your life, right? In fact, it tends to go the other way once you get above a certain level, and yet people think that, it's like with food, if I have a little food is good, I have to have all the food. If I have a little money, then I have to have all the money, right? So the Bible does not speak well of this. Now, conflict, okay. What did your family teach you about conflict? Like I say, in your family, nothing. It never happened.
Actually, none of those,
None of these things were spoken about, right? Because they didn't.
or acted on or anything.
They just kind of kept it at a certain level of small talk, and that was the.
Well, talk was almost non-existent because my parents were deaf,
Okay.
but, nothing.
Did that affect how they were able to communicate? When I say that, because even though you can use sign language, right? Did they have trouble expressing certain ideas and thoughts if there wasn't a sign for it?
Beats the heck out of me.
Just a little curious thought. Because I heard one person talk about because their parents had a different language and that language didn't have certain prepositions that we had in English, they had no thought, like the word ought to be, what something ought to be. They had no concept of ought to be. It just is, right? Or it isn't. And they had no, because of the language barrier. And I wonder if that maybe played in there, that if they had a thought they wanted to express but didn't have the means to express it.
They were both vocal, they weren't born deaf.
Okay.
Mother did not sign to me, she spoke.
Okay.
He never spoke to me.
Okay, somebody else. Somebody talked about conflict in your house. How was it, Debbie? How was conflict resolved? What did you learn about conflict from your upbringing?
A lot of yelling.
A lot of yelling. Emotion was expressed immediately and as loud as possible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, my dad, when he'd get mad, he just, whoever was in the way, they got out of the way.
So I'm going to guess in your family then, they either learn to explode or hide.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what you learn about conflict. You're either the exploder or you're the hider, right? Because two people break different ways, right? One will look at it and say, well, I better be that loud one who gets in someone's face because that's the person with the power. And the other one learns, hey, I better get out of the way of somebody like that. Yeah. I like it with the sisters sitting beside each other because, So somebody else, did anybody learn that you're not allowed to be mad? Did anybody ever have a house where you weren't allowed to show anger, you weren't allowed to show any kind of, right?
You're going to do it, and you're going to like it.
And you know what you said in your heart, I'm not going to like it.
I don't even like you.
What you were saying to them, not me. You made eye contact. I just
Just
right
in my
there.
head.
All right. How was conflict directed at you in your house? How was conflict? No, we haven't picked on you at all. How was conflict directed at you in your house growing up?
We were racist,
Yeah.
Oh, my dad, I didn't have a real dad, but my grandparents took care of me.
Mhm.
And my grandfather was the more aggressive attitude, he had the bad attitude, and if you didn't do it, you get spanked for it. So, and if you misplaced things, he didn't like that either. But my grandmother, she was more a calm person.
You know when you say that about misplacing things, and I think this is a dad thing. For some reason, dads are always convinced that kids are stealing their tools.
Oh, yeah.
A dad takes a 10-centimeter wrench, which is the wrench you need for everything, for whatever reason. That's the one that disappears, and you are convinced one of your kids has gone and gotten your 10 millimeter wrench, right? That's obviously they did that, right? I know my dad did the same thing to me, and I remember not being able to find a socket and thought, those kids. They're into my sockets, I know it, right?
But in this case, we are stealing.
Yeah, in this case, they actually. I said the other day, Tristan, where are the needle nose pliers at? And he reaches under his bed and pulls out a toolbox. I said, oh, okay. Now I know. I tell you what, at 7:15, we'll skip this, we'll come back. Grief. How many of your parents you know while you were in their house experienced grief? This is an interesting thing because, go ahead, yeah, because Brian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know September of 1968 had to really be hard on my dad because his mom was dying of cancer, and then his dad got in a car accident, and his dad actually died first, but his two parents died 10 days apart.
And how was that expressed in the household? Like, what does the house become like? Not the first week, because the first week you had the funeral. You had
He was prepared for his mom dying, and then what happened to his dad was a shock.
And also, let me take one step back because I didn't do this. How does the Bible say we resolve conflict? Right? Because the key here is, this is what we're learning from our family. We use the Word of God to prune. Right? Your family just gives you this big jumbled mess of everything they've been through. Right? What you can do with the Word of God, because it is sharper than any two-edged sword, is you can take this Word of God and say, you know what? That doesn't need to be in my life. Right? This thing here you left, I don't need that. And you can use the Word of God and cut those pieces out that other people have put on you. Because if it doesn't measure up to this, you have every right as God's child to say, no, I've got a new dad now, and the rules have changed. Right? So we can take any of this. So let's take conflict. What does God's Word say about conflict?
You're supposed to go to the person and iron it out.
You're supposed to go to the person and express to them why they hurt you, and then try and get it fixed. And if it doesn't, you bring another person with you. So now you have a mediator in between you, right? Hey, look, this has hurt me. This person's along with me. And then if it doesn't, and they still just don't want to make it right, then you just, okay, we're going to just dust off our shoes, right? And we're going to move on with our life. So it actually gives you a pattern, right? Try and work it out. If they don't, bring in another person, mediate it. If that doesn't work out, dust your shoes off and move on with your life, right? It doesn't involve yelling at them. There's no go scream at the person who sinned against you, right? There's no icy cold shoulder. Don't ever talk to the person again that did you wrong, right? Because this says you got to go work it out with them. That means if you just ignore them, right? Because people tend to break with either I'm going to yell at you for it or I'm just going to cut you out of my life for it, right? That's kind of the... But that in the Bible doesn't give any room for either of those. Because it says you got to go try and work it out, right? That's good. I'm glad you brought it. I didn't even think of that verse. You brought it up, so good. I'm glad you came tonight, Mary.
What did you think of?
The only one I said was be angry and sin not.
Oh.
That you can be mad about something, but you don't take it out on somebody. Right? That it can burn in your soul, but that doesn't mean, because again, if it's burning in me, right? Oh, now I'm mad about it, right? Because I'm a passionate person, so I'm going to get angry about something, right? But if all of a sudden that anger says, well, my anger is your fault, right? Then I'm going to try and take that anger out on you. Now I'm going to try and get you to understand the injustice that burns in me, right? And that's where it becomes sin. When I try to fix it with my anger, right? When I try to fix it, and especially Kristen is the queen of telling me, put it in God's hands. Are you doing something about it? Then it's not in his hands. Right? But I want to call him, then it's not in his hands. But I'd like to, then it's not right. There are times where I just have to say, you know what, okay, you're right, Lord, here it is. And I go and talk to the Lord about it. And I pray about it a whole bunch before. And there are people that I wait until God says it's okay to call them now before I do. Because I need to know that he's worked in their heart what he needs to work, and he's worked in my heart what he needs to work, so that I can have that conversation, and it's a good one, and it's not a, I've got to take something out on you, or you've got to punish me, but it's a, this is what we can do to make this better, right? All right, grief. So we got one where somebody's losing people. My mom, her brother was shot by the cops when, I guess I was 13. And I remember my mom going through that, right? In as much as I did, I know you're going to be shocked, I was kind of an oblivious kid to a lot of things going on in the house, right? Did anybody else have a family? Oh my gosh, I could tell stories about my grandmother, I know, because my grandmother was raised in rural Oklahoma, right? I mean, and there was a point at which she was pregnant and she miscarried, but she was home by herself in the country, and there was nothing she could do except to wrap it up and wait for her husband to come home and bury it. right? And so imagine living with that kind of thing, and yet she just learned to, overcome, right? She learned to just, she'd get up, start cleaning the house, doing the dishes, whatever, because in her mind it was just keep going, right? Don't stop, don't mourn, don't do anything, because you couldn't, right? There was no time for that. Did anybody else ever grow up in a house where you had grief occur, where you had, go ahead.
I never thought my dad loved us ever, and he was an alcoholic too, and we didn't have a great life growing up. But I had, my first brother died at 20, and I always thought my dad didn't love us, and out of the funeral, at the cemetery, I seen him right the first time. And that's the first time I ever thought he must love us, because why is he crying? So it was very emotional, but I learned from that. And I never felt real close to my dad, but I did think my dad must have loved us if he would be crying at that time.
So you actually learned something good about grief, that at least in grief you find out what's important. I remember my grandfather died, and we went to Arizona for the funeral, and I always remember this one point, right? Because my grandfather, this is on my dad's side, this is the good one, right? And when he died, some of the kids were in church, and some of them were outside of church, and some of them were talking about, the funeral, and some were talking about going out to a bar, right? And there was a little bit of conflict there, and there were some things going on. But then I remember that they all started talking about Grandpa's Bible. And the funny thing was, it wasn't anything serious, because the question was, were they going to bury his Bible with them? To which somebody said, why? He can't read it. And to which another person said, well, you're going to bury a flashlight too. But for a moment, the family stopped arguing and everything was okay, and they were kind of joking, because the one thing they knew was about Grandpa's Bible, and they all kind of centered around that. They all had stories about it. They all understood that it was part of who he was, right? And so that was the one thing I learned about grief, is sometimes in grief, it's okay to laugh, and that sometimes helps. It almost feels inappropriate sometimes, but I've always found, like when I go to hospital visits, things like that, if I can bring a little levity into that, take their mind off what they're going through, that's one of the things that I like to do. Right? Because I saw it work in my own family. I saw it happen in my own. Anyone else? Get your arms crossed. Yeah. So, anybody tell me what the Bible says about grief? I got a good one here. You ready for it? Jesus wept. Jesus was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. Right? Jesus had come to raise Lazarus from the dead. But in the moment before he does that, he feels the loss of his friend. And Jesus wept. Right? In front of people. Right? I like this because there was another point at which someone's daughter died, and Jesus walks into the room and they have mourners there. Everybody is crying and wailing, and Jesus says, why are you crying? She's not dead. She's asleep. And people get mad. What? Right? And then what's awesome is Jesus runs them out of the house. Right? He doesn't stop to catch his breath. He gets them all out of the room because he doesn't want them in there. He's about to perform this miracle and raise this girl from the dead. But here, go ahead, Mona.
Could it be Jesus wept, seeing the grief of his family, not necessarily feeling it himself, but because his family was hurting? Mary and Martha were.
Oh, I think because he really loved him.
Well, yeah.
The text point. Sorry, can you need some water, Bear? Here, just put it in my mouth. The text points to it being that he loved Lazarus.
Yeah.
And that's why. Yeah. Right? And I think that was just, to me, it was just part of Jesus being fully human and fully divine, is allowing himself to feel that. God never feels the loss, right? Because God has everything. There's no lack in God. There's nothing missing. There's nothing needed, right? But here in the person of Jesus, he walks like we walk, right? And in that moment... Do you have another example? I can think of David, when David lost his first child, right? When the child's sick, he fasts and he doesn't shave and he doesn't eat, and he locks himself up, but then the baby dies anyway. And so he goes and he eats and he shaves, and they say, why are you doing that? He says, well, when the baby was alive, maybe there was a chance, but now that he's passed, what good will it do? You see David showing grief, right? You see David weeping over the child. You see David, feeling that, right?
I thought whenever Jesus reaches Jerusalem, he looks out at the whole city and he sobs.
And this is the amazing thing about that, right? Because Jesus says, if all the things that have been done here had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have turned. But you, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, right? Because Jesus also was one that prophesied that not one stone would be left standing on another.
Yeah.
Jesus could already see that the city was bound to destruction.
Yeah.
The Romans were going to, within 70 years, completely obliterate the city. And in that moment, right, he weeps Jerusalem,
And
Jerusalem.
everything that was going to follow this people.
And yeah.
I mean, even including the whole, everything.
Was anyone taught when it comes to grief that you weren't allowed to cry, you weren't allowed to show that it hurt?
Yes. Yep.
They show that with the men, boys, boys don't cry,
Right.
you know.
I come from a Pentecostal family, so you know. Jimmy Swagger broke that barrier for all of us. Here's another one. What about don't be depressed? I'm depressed. Well, don't be. You know, I had this little revelation about depression today. You ready for it? And again, I'm not someone who suffers from it chronically like other people do, and I don't want to take light at chronic depression. But my picture of depression and grief is always this, that it's always a maze that you've got to find your way out of. Right? And the problem is mazes can be confusing, right? You can end up taking the same circle over and over again. You can end up in the same place over and over again. But I always feel like there's an out. But it's not the same for everybody. In fact, it's not the same for any two people most of the time. But you got to find that. With me, it's always in my walk with the Lord. I've got to figure out what it is that's affecting me, that's putting this on me, and I've got to find my way out of it that way. And for other people, maybe it's a bigger, more complicated maze. But I just had that picture when I was thinking about people who struggle with depression as seeing it as a maze, and you've just got to figure out what it is that's going to get you out of there. Right? What it is that's going to get you to the exit. You got to find that light. You got to hear the voice of the Lord. You got to know where He's leading. You got to figure out what it is. A lot of times, what's causing it, right? Because depression doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? On the one hand, whenever you're in depression, the enemy will be speaking into your heart. Oh, you're terrible. You're horrible. You failed. You failed. You failed. Right? On the other hand, he's talking the truth about some of it, isn't he? We do fail. We do mess up. We do have a whole list of things that if God wants to call us to the carpet on, He can just judge us guilty right now, right? And we don't hear the other voice that says, right, but you're my child, and I love you, and you're going to make it. Yeah, you've messed up, but you're going to do better. And you're growing, and you're getting stronger, and you're getting closer, and you're getting more sanctified, and you're getting more holy. And every time you fall, you get back up, and you keep coming towards me, right? A lot of times it's harder to hear that than it is to hear all the other voices. Get over it. How long are you allowed to grieve? Right? I can't use that illustration. Move on. Anybody ever grieved and someone told them that, get over it? You've been down about it enough.
My dad told me when we lost our second son, he said, I wanted my mom to stay with me. And they lived in Iowa. And he said, we only lost a baby. She's my wife. I need her home with me. I was like, that's how much he loves us. It was only a baby. What did it matter?
Oh my gosh.
Get over it. Grow up. Whatever.
Wow.
That's a major subject, grief.
How long is oh my gosh, look at that. We're not even and we've got 4 minutes. And I knew this. I knew when I started writing this down, I was like, okay, stop, because we're never getting through this. So there's no point moving on. But how has God's Word changed how we think about grief? One, I like that it says that we don't mourn like those who have no hope. Right?
Going to a different one, when I had a race up there, and in my life, when I was like a 7, 8-year-old boy, baseball was everything. And I knew everything about the Cubs, watched them all the time. And people like Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Ferguson Jenkins, who happened to be black, they were like gods to me. And that affected my race relations. They were like gods to me, so I had no problem not being racist against
Wait, I know we don't have enough time to even start, right? Because we're yeah. So let's do this. Let's get back to the question we wanted to end with. Somebody go to Matthew 10:37. Somebody else go to Ezekiel 18:19 through 23. Actually, I'll do Ezekiel. Somebody get Matthew and read that out when you get there.
I haven't.
Go ahead.
Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me.
That is like the meanest thing Jesus ever said, right? And I've always taken that as just the meanest thing he ever said, right up there with the Samaritan woman, he says, why should I take the children's food and give it to the dogs? Two meanest things Jesus ever said. Now, we have this really nice, flowery, peaceful image of Jesus, but sometimes he said some stuff that hurt. But what I like about that verse is when we talk about what did my family teach me versus what does God teach me, is that sometimes you have to look at your family and you have to look at the person of Jesus and you have to say, you know what? What you're doing with me is more important than where I came from. And what you're putting into my life is more important than how I was raised. And what you want me to be is more important than what my parents want me to be. Imagine that. What God wants you to be is more important than what your parents wanted you to be. Whether or not you succeed in His eyes is more important than whether or not you succeed in your own family's eyes. And families are nothing if not big buckets of expectation that they put on you, right? They name you from a little child. You get nicknames or you get little things that they tease you about or things like that where they're trying to identify you as this and make you that, right? And what God's saying is, I've made you something, and what I've made you is more important than what they're making you. Right? And Ezekiel will end with this. Ezekiel says, the soul that sins shall die. Very cheerful, Ezekiel. I like it. The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer iniquity of the son. The righteous of the righteousness shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. But if a wicked person turns away from all his sins he has committed and keeps my statute and does what is right, he shall surely live. He shall not die. None of the transgressions that he has committed shall be remembered against him, for the righteousness that he has done shall live. Have I any pleasure in the death of the wicked, declares the Lord, and rather not that he should turn from his way and live. That no matter where else we are at, that God says, you can turn around, you can change, you can be forgiven. Right? Doesn't matter what your parents put on you, doesn't matter what your family puts on you, doesn't matter what other people put on you, doesn't matter what they call you at your job, doesn't matter what they call you at your church. It matters that you turn towards God, away from the things that are not of God, and you will live. Amen? Amen.